blaming frontline responders for failures in disaster response ignores the real problem, the systematic organizational deficiencies. While frontline workers make it work, this masks leadership failures and prevents necessary reforms. True improvement requires organizational adaptation, leadership accountability, and systematic change, not just expecting the frontline first responders to compensate for broken systems. That, I wrote that as a takeaway from one of the documents you were kind enough to share with us. What does that mean for the listener?
Well, what I think it means is we're the problem solvers, right? We show up on an incident and we're expected to solve problems. That oftentimes gets, in my view, gets transferred back to systemic or process failures. And so there's an issue with the system that if the system was improved, the issue would no longer exist, and it would give us discretionary time to focus on other more important priorities. But instead, we just accept that the system is flawed, and then we work on ways to build a workaround to get around that systemic failure. And that works once, twice, three times. But next thing you know, different shifts, completely different ways of operating. It's easy to say those guys are doing it different. They should quit doing it different. But there's a reason they do it different. And that's probably because there's, at least at some level, not a systemic standard that is effective across there or that serves the needs of the frontline, firefighters in this case, in solving the problems we've asked them to solve. So they're trying to meet the intent, and they're not doing it our way because we didn't build a very good way. And we go on to the next thing. Yeah.
Yeah, communicating that mission intent and allowing people the freedom to, freedom's a bit of a stretch word, a way to find the path. They say a leader points the way and that the team should find the path, because there's no greater sort of failure or like sacrilege than to do something efficiently and effectively that shouldn't be done at all. And often we end up doing that is because I suppose what you see with a lot of new leadership is they start a new thing, they have a new workaround, they have a new idea, they have a new way of working. But with respect, I always think that anyone can come up with a new way to do something. I think it takes real leadership to stop doing something old. Do you know what I mean? But these relic habits, the process, the procedure, the form that we fill out, the tactical approach template that we've always done, but doesn't necessarily fit this environment. I mean, you've done a tremendous amount of work around, I love this concept of red teaming. Red teaming's a military concept, isn't it? You also hear of, we used to do pre-mortems. I used to work in a fast-moving consumer goods company, and they used to do pre-mortems where they would say, so let's say we're 6 hours into the launch of this new production line, and this has happened. What are the possible reasons that could have happened, and how can we reverse this equation and think about those considerations? We spoke before we started recording about black box thinking. When did you first come across that book? Because that might be a nice segue analogy into the concept of debriefing and reflection on our operational effectiveness.
I can't remember exactly when I first came across that book. I do remember it was after the Yarnell's Hill fire, where we lost a significant number of wildland firefighters in one incident, where it's like, we have to get better. We have to get better at our systems. We have to get better at how we're doing things. And that's really when I started diving into how we make decisions, our decision-making processes, and then some of the simple things that we could do better on the front line to help improve. And then by proxy, it became wow, we could do these great, but if we're operating in a system that doesn't, mission command, for example, if you tell people to exhibit, to align with intent and exhibit discipline initiative, and then you have a system that's rigid and is centralized, those are, you can't have both those things at the same time. Yeah. And that's kind of where it went from there.
John McDonough, I know you listened to an episode with him not so long ago, and he speaks about this element of the timid firefighter. And I suppose we could expand that out to the timid leader, where I know certainly in the UK Fire and Rescue Service, maybe 10, 15 years ago, we found ourselves in ways painted into a corner because we were so entrenched with a lot of policies and procedures written with great intent, but had really tied the hands of people using their initiative. Do you know what I mean? People using their real world lived experience of what they feel should be done. We have what's called national operational guidance here in the UK now, and people are actually really struggle with guidance at times because the clue is in the name. It's guidance. It's not prescriptive, and it should be designed to empower you to use your real world experience, your learned knowledge, this raft of, you're a problem solving expert as in theory as an operational firefighter or incident commander, where you're turning up with a bunch of enthusiastic dogs on leashes with a big red box full of tools, and it's entirely up to you what your strategy and your tactics are to overcome this challenge. But is there an aspect, because obviously for the listeners' familiarity, the accent might give it away. You're obviously not from the UK. There's an element of line of duty deaths that I want to ask you about, which I know was not actually a part of our context for the conversation, but I use it to perhaps introduce the concept that when we're debriefing on something, I find the reasons, from a UK perspective, I find the reasons we struggle with it at times is because we don't want to be seen to be pointing a finger or speaking ill of people that have died. And this element of duty, line of duty death, like it's an expectation, like you might die in this job, Jayson, and that's just something you've accepted because it's really dangerous. Yes, you might, and we'll thank you for your service, and we'll send your partner a lovely letter and all that sort of jazz, and maybe someone will give you some money to support your family, hopefully. But sometimes it wasn't just because the job was so hard and everyone did everything right. At times, perhaps we could have done better.
Absolutely, right. And so, when you say that, Pete, I think about two different things. Like, so you could say, hey, we're not going to speak ill of the dead and we're going to move forward. And that means that there's a lesson there that you acknowledge exists, and you're choosing not to explore it because you don't want to offend. And I frankly, that means it's more likely to be repeated in my mind. So if we really want to keep people safe and we want to prevent it from happening again, then we have to talk about that stuff. We have to talk about how communication, or we talk about decentralized leadership and mission.
Yeah, that was my next question. So decentralized leadership and the expectations of the subordinate leader. Unfold that a little bit for me, for people that are unfamiliar with the terms.
So the way I think the way the literature says, and the way I look at it, is that for a subordinate leader in a decentralized system to be effective, one thing he has to have is the autonomy, the freedom of movement to operate within whatever the sideboards are. And those sideboards, he needs to know what those are. I can go from here to here without having to ask for permission. And he has to know what the standard approach is, so that when he deviates from the standard approach, he lets other people know how he's deviated so they can adjust accordingly. He's not asking for permission, he or she. He's just saying that this is the deviation that I've made. And that's the part, going back to what you said earlier, is you have to know all those guidelines. You have to know so you can acknowledge when you're deviating from them, give the reason why the standard approach wouldn't work, and that updates everybody else's situational awareness about it. And then you're executing on the deviation. You're not asking for permission, but you're informing everybody else so that they can operate in lockstep.
We're increasing their shared situational awareness as well.
Yeah, right. It doesn't. You do it a different way, and they don't know why. And so then are they going to assume you forgot the standard way? Or are they going to assume there's something else? And
so as a leader on an incident ground or in an event like that, how do you balance the overwhelming feeling that you as the commander has overall responsibility? Because this is something I see with the long screwdriver approach, when you as the senior officer has overall responsibility, and if something's going to go wrong on this incident ground, it's going to fall on your shoulders. That can be a tremendous barrier to empowering decentralized leaders or subordinate leaders. How do you, because we're going through a lot of retirement here in the UK Fire and Rescue Service, a lot of people are very green in the job, not a massive amount of experience doesn't make them any less reliable, but it can make people very reluctant to empowering people to make their own decisions.
No, you're right. Because, if you trust someone, then, you believe they're competent. If you don't believe they're competent, then you have a hard time trusting them. In mission command, you have to trust your subordinate leader. And I think, Von Moltke said, if the leader knew what I knew, would he do what I did? And so you should be able to answer yes to that question, right? And I don't think you're going to solve that on the fire ground. I think that's something you better work on ahead of time. And if you have, the crew resource management, simulations, whatever, you're going to have to build some of that ahead of time and make sure that everybody's on the same page and call it out when you're not. If there's somebody that seems to be leading with their ego and want to make decisions and can't explain them, you're going to have to help that person understand why. Being able to articulate why they made a deviation is as critical as knowing when what the deviation is they should make. Because that's how you build trust, right? It shows confidence. Yeah.
I think building trust is a very, very difficult thing for people. I think we're just societally getting a little bit worse at it. I think in many ways we're getting healthier in our ability to question. I always talk about the hippo, the highest paid person's opinion. Our ability to question that in a polite and professional manner. Because if I've just instructed you to go around the back of that property, carry out a 360, and you realize there's a basement there that I wasn't aware of, and I'm already going balls to the wall with my tactical, choices out there in the front of the incident ground, you have to have the ability to speak up, because that's effectively, we spoke before we came on about Martin Bromley and the issues that have been had in aviation and also in our healthcare services, where somebody knew something was going wrong, but they didn't think they had the authority. They didn't think it was their place. Like that's like you say, a lot of that relationship building has to be done before you're at the tip of the sword, I suppose. But I'm not sure just to say, how do we do that? Because it's very easy for us to sit here and just say, well, you just need to build that trust and accountability and all of these buzzword bingo. You know what I mean? How do we actually do that with teams when you're working with leaders?
When you are the leader, I think you demonstrate vulnerability, and it doesn't have to be, in big ways. I think it's funny because two things there. You have to demonstrate vulnerability, and the more expertise you demonstrate, the less likely people are to question your view of something. Because if you're, if you have a high degree of expertise in something, then when you come and say, hey, I've looked at this and this is what I think the solution is, and this is where we should go with this, you need to invite those questions. And that's one of the things like red teaming and liberating structures. That's one of the ways that it does that. If one of these three questions you ask. So if the plan fails, where will it fail? And what have we done to prepare for it? As a leader, you can ask that question. I'm not saying it will fail, but if the plan fails, where will it fail? And then the other one is letting people know that, hey, this is my plan. I know it can be better. This is the best I came up with. I need your help to make it better. You need to invite them in, because you got to create a safe space, right? Because if you have position authority over them, all that kind of stuff, if you don't create the safe space and then they don't speak up, that's not on them. That's on you. So that's to me.
So red teaming, expand on that element, because we spoke about red teaming and pre-mortems and things like that. Just unfold for and for myself, but certainly for the listener, because I don't want us to lose people as we move through this conversation. Just unfold a little bit more, otherwise we'll get into our own little echo chamber and we'll lose everybody else. What's red teaming, and where did it come from?
So it came from the military, and it was a response in part to, they have this thing called the MDMP, the military decision making process, and it was basically it'd be like, you present 3 different courses of action, and then you're supposed to select the best one. But what happened, you ask firefighters, there's something that they want to do, and then you say, hey, present me with 3 options, including the one you want to do. The one they want to do is going to be great, and the other 2 are going to be milk toast, right? They're going to be terrible. And so there was some of that, and so you weren't getting the best quality decision. So they're just a set of tools that you can use that and you can even build whole teams to do it. That's how the military did it, but we use it more as like an ad hoc way to apply to those situations to help improve the decision quality. And so this is decision quality in our world divorced from outcomes. Because if we always say that
Say that again.
Yeah.
That's really good. That
Right, decision quality divorced from outcomes.
beautiful.
So if we think about decision quality, right, we should be looking at like, of all the sources of evidence that we should have considered, were they considered? Did you follow a good process? Did you ensure that you did things to mitigate your bias, avoid groupthink, those sorts of things? That you did all those. Now, there's still so much uncertainty, right? It still couldn't have the desired effect we want. And so the outcome may not be what was desired, but our decision quality could still be high. And inversely, we can be successful despite ourselves in our world, right? We could have a good outcome.
Eventually, they all go out, and the public doesn't know what good looks like. You know what I mean? So they'll still clap for you no matter what.
And like one of the great ones is we'll do is that's really useful is we'll key assumptions check. So the first thing you do is you look at your plan and you're like, how many things in this plan are assumptions? Now, you're not saying they're good or bad. Sometimes you got to make assumptions about things, whether it's the environment, whether the weather could be on that day, whatever. And then how many of these things are facts? And so right then, you've already kind of upped your game because you've distinguished what is known, which is what may be knowable later, but isn't absolutely known right now. And then you're like, of these key assumptions, or of these assumptions, which one of them have to be true for our plan to be successful? And then you start talking about those. Okay, if that's not true, then what does that mean? And right then you've already made, because now you're actually drilling down into the nuts and bolts of it, not doing like I just did, where you're just throwing a bunch of words around. And you're like, okay, this is how we can make this plan better. And then, you know, how many times when you think about your primary versus your alternative approach, you say you have an alternative approach and you'll say, yeah, the alternative approach is we'll go defensive on a fire. And then, but that means a lot more than just those words, especially if people are interior, still doing the search. You know, there's certain things, a lot of them are scripted for us, right? But in other ways, they're not scripted. And you just got to make sure that you've drawn out enough of the detail in that secondary plan that if you do have to execute, you've, you know, it's robust enough to actually be an effective plan.
Was that, then I'm getting, the gentleman's name is it Rumsfeld? Where he speaks about
nobles and unknowns. Yeah, it was it.
I was trying to connect. As soon as you said it, I was like, he said something around, as we know, there are no knowns. There are things we know. We also know that there are unknowns, and there are known unknowns, and there are unknown unknowns. And it almost reflects onto that, is it Johari's window as well that we use as a, about those elements of the seen self and the known self. And I'll tell you what, I love that sort of stuff. But again, you've got to be careful not to get into buzzword bingo. But you really do have to question your assumptions. We used to do, echoing back to the fast-moving consumer goods stuff that I used to work in, with the Kaizen and Six Sigma training, we used to do 5-way exercises. Did you ever do those?
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
So if we like connected those dots backwards on a red team or something like that, and we said, okay, well, we failed to, we deployed firefighters in time, the setup was great, but we failed to keep the fire to the room of origin. And we said, well, why might that happen? And we go, well, we didn't get to it fast enough. Okay, well, why wouldn't we get to it fast enough? Because our search procedures weren't very good. Okay, well, why? Because we don't drill search procedures very much. Well, why? You know, we don't drill them because we only put it on the diary for training once a week. And you could follow this thread back all the time, because the easy one is just to say the fire, and it's also about putting things within your sphere of control and your sphere of influence. Because you could just go, well, the fire was just out of control, and you know, the ventilation profile was against us. It'd gone past flashover, and da 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 da. You know, and no one. This is the thing about stuff like this. Like, no one would have the right not to. John spoke about it so goddamn well when he was saying, like, the two alternate universes where we turn up to a fire. I send a team in. You know, I can see it's coming out the window. I've gone around, done my 360. I come back to the front of the house, and Jayson and his colleague come out. They're absolutely fucking ball bagged. You know, they're saying it's too hot. I can't proceed past a couple meters down the hallway. And in an alternate universe, he's on the route to the job, and he's looking in the back of the truck, and there's two brand new recruits, and they've only just come out of training school, and he goes to the job. They go in exactly the same building, exactly the same conditions. He does a 360. They come back around the front and they go, boss, fire's out. I'm ready to put the fan on. To you, you're going to assume that the first job was just, it was fucking inferno in there. You had absolutely no hope. And the second one, you're like, well, it must have been nothing.
Yeah.
But no, you ask yourself, well, what actually happened in there? There's an assumption made, isn't there? And this is maybe a good avenue to experience for a second. Like the assumption of time in service and or experience equals expertise. You know, that whole kind of 10,000 hour rule. But it's the difference between just experience and like purposeful practice, because someone that's come out of training school might actually be, you know, the most up to date with their observations. They might have had the most recent immersive training, and they make quicker, more muscle memory decisions in those moments. And this is where I love the analogies that you compare to military, because I always say, like, it's a very small number, something like 12% of the military will ever deploy to a conflict zone. But they drill all the goddamn time. The muscle memory is so goddamn sharp, and most of them are never going to do it. They're never going to do it. Whereas for firefighters, it's a high likelihood on every tour you're going to be turning out to an incident. But I feel like we don't build that same level of muscle memory. Certainly in the UK, where, you know, we've been very successful with our prevention and protection, all this sort of stuff. The fires are dropping. They're dropping tremendously.
Yep.
But I argue that if you don't drill with a greater level of intention and simulation, you're actually increasing the risk, because you're not getting that feedback. You're not getting the operational feedback of how effective you truly were.
I agree. And, you know, you talked about experience, and there's a difference between 10 years of experience and the same year of experience 10 times. And we got to help people get across that, right? Because there's some people that you're like, I swear that guy's still on year one. And it's like, you know,
Yes.
And part of that is, you know, part of that's an individual, part of that is the system that they're in. And I think what you're talking about how the things that we need to do more of. I mean, we look how we get people hurt. And one of ours that flies under the radar all the time is motor vehicle accidents on interstates, on busy roadways. And then when we talk about how we position apparatus, and then if we don't have enough, how we kind of just hang it out there around a corner and I'm like, I don't know the answer to this, but I wonder, I'm like, are we really exposing ourselves more in that environment? You know, if we went in there without an SCBA into a fire, without a breathing apparatus, you know, that would be, you should not do that. You're going to get yourself killed. We position apparatus in the wrong space, or don't have enough people committed to a scene of an accident in a place that we know is a busy, dangerous part of an interstate, or, you know, and so I think that's part of it too, is being more deliberate in both cases about how we work to improve the situation and focus on the situations that truly present the highest risk and prioritize that. Yeah.
There's a good point there to just build on for me, where the type of work that we attend as first responders is often very complicated, but sometimes it's not as complex as we'd like to say it is sometimes. Like, I love the job, I love getting into the operational tactics and all that sort of stuff. But I think it was, the gentleman's name's going to escape me, I apologize. But he said, fire is just chemistry and physics. You know, unfortunately, it is just chemistry and physics, with the greatest of respect. And I know we treat it differently all over the world, and there's arguments for complexities of layouts and building structures and the materials that we use and our capacity and the water flow ability we get out the mains and all that sort of jazz. But all of that, given enough preparedness, can all be factored in. Like a car engine, isn't it? I couldn't explain a combustion engine to you, because I don't know enough about it. I could talk about pistons and 2-stroke versus 4-stroke and all that sort of stuff. I can go with you a little bit, but it's not a complex system. It's just complicated. It can all be explained. Complex systems come into play usually through a human interaction, in my personal experience, when you're balancing behaviors, emotions, political challenges, decisions related to hierarchy and trust, a lot of the stuff that you speak about. Just expand for me, if you could, a little bit around those complex, complicated, simple and chaotic environments that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, great. So, um, Dave Snowden, I think you know, he's the master of that stuff, and I like the way that he approaches the ordered systems are simple and complex. So, I can't put a Rolex together and take it apart, but somebody that's good at that, they can do it all day long. So, there's a degree of technical expertise you have, just like you talked about the automotive engine. There's a degree, but it's repeatable. When it comes to complexity, and I think you're right, complex adaptive systems, when you have a physical domain, you have, even procedures, and then you have people put in there, the landscape keeps changing. So it's not always the same problem every time that you're approaching. And to me, that's where complexity comes in. And I think the biggest distinction is that when things are complicated, you can create a process to address that. And when things are complex, you need to you need to appreciate the context more. You need to adapt more to the context. So
Yeah,
we
you
do that.
spoke about intuitive expertise
Yep.
when we were communicating.
Yeah, you're right. It's great. Intuitive expertise is an excellent thing to achieve if you operate in a static environment and where the conditions are relatively the same. But it takes too many sets and reps to be able to do it if in an environment that changes. So you need to, David Snow would tell you that you make small experiments, you find out what works, and then you exploit that. And on large wildfires, that's what happens all the time. You got to look for those windows, and it's usually nothing sexy either. It's a small fuel transition. It's a break in the weather. It's that you get, something that happens that if you've set yourself up for success and you have a good enough system, you can capitalize on that because you can move quickly. If you don't, then you miss those opportunities and things get bigger. But as you also said earlier, you can blame that on the environment. And so it's really not your fault. Yeah, it was just too hot. It was too this, it was too that. And
Wildfire environments, take me deeper on that, because actually that is a really great example that goes against what I said earlier, which is, oh, they all go out eventually.
yeah,
Not with we've seen a lot of examples around the world. Wildfire, not necessarily. Okay, this shit can keep going for as long as you want to mess about for. Like, when you've done a tremendous amount of work in this area, is there any kind of difference that you encourage in the decision making in those sort of rapidly adaptive systems, with looking for the least worst outcome in these quite incomplete information cycles, and that kind of iterative decision making process to improve our tactical approach? It must be a much. I've been to quite a lot of wildfires, but in the UK they're very different. They're much smaller. They're much more controlled. It's a much wetter climate with respect here in the UK. I'm not saying it's easier. I know in Wales, certainly in the UK, they've done a great deal of work with wildfire. But you guys and girls, it's very much more your bread and butter. To cycle back to the question that was hidden amongst all of that, like, is there a different mindset that you go about when speaking to people about wildfires?
there certainly is because, and I think you saw some of this in LA. The expectation is that by the public at least, is that if you had enough fire engines, helicopters, whatever, that no matter what, you could put it out. And there's certain days under certain conditions, like what they experience, where you can't. And I think, to me, one of my battalion chief shared this with me. He goes, "Isn't it kind of like a hurricane? Like, you wouldn't expect someone to say, 'Hey, you should have saved my house from that Category 5 hurricane,' no matter what, And if you didn't, that's because you didn't do it right." And I think on wildfires under certain days, that's exactly the case. The conditions um, aren't any that you're going to get a win in. And so the first hard thing is accepting that. And the second thing is setting yourself up for success when you do get that little window. And then how you're going to, and there's, big coordination pieces, all that in there. But, strategy, it's ends, ways, and means, right? We can talk about what we want to achieve, but it, you have to have the ways and the means to achieve it. You have to have the resources, and you have to have the methods that are going to get you there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things that is, I think, different about wildfires, and in large part because we don't we don't even recognize all the variables that come into play until real time. And and we don't have the level of expertise about why things happen like we do in, the structural fire world, because it's not so contained. Um, yeah.
You gave an example of. I'd love to go into a few specifics here because otherwise, I know people sometimes have a dislike for the vagueness, which is my fault always because I get the excited Labrador energy and I start bouncing around from topic to topic. You gave a list of some really interesting major incidents that might act as a nice analogy for some of these. The Rodeo Chudesky fire in 2002.
Yeah. So that one,
Unfold that one for us.
so the Rodeo Chestnut fire was two different fires that grew together and ended up being about 500,000 acres by the end of the day. And it was coming up out of some very steep terrain called the Mogollon Rim. And then up on top where we call them values, but where all the homes and the communities and stuff were. So, what was interesting is at first, because the fire was two different fires and there were so many things threatened at the same time. It was young in my career, so I have a very different lens than I do right now on incidents. But
what was your role in that incident, just for people's knowledge? Sorry.
I was an engine boss, so I was in charge. I was like an engine captain, and then I was a task force leader, so I was in charge of 4 or 5 engines. So very tactical role. And but what the thing I learned from that stuck with me is that as that fire came up on the rim, and we would be successful at night, and then in the daytime conditions would change, and we would be, the fire would go across the lines that we had put in, and my first way of viewing that at that level is like, man, if those guys that work on the day shift could just hold the stuff that we put in place, everything would be better. And then about halfway through that incident, I'm like, we must not be putting things in the right place, because if we're not setting them up for success in the daytime, then it doesn't matter, because it's going across what we're trying to hold. Looking at success based on intent and the objective you're trying to achieve is more important than looking at it as like tactically what we did that day. And like, I think I can sum that up for listener stuff is saying that if tactical success that doesn't support a strategic outcome is useless. So we make tactical success every day, but the strategic outcomes weren't being supported. So
it goes back to that thing that there's nothing worse than doing something efficiently that wasn't worth doing at all.
Yep. Especially when you only have a finite amount of time, right? There's only so many ridges between you get to the communities. And that was a big lesson, I think, from.
I'd love to just drag me down for a second if you can, because again, I've had the privilege of speaking with a couple of wildfire experts from around the world, but I know we're picking up new listeners all the time, and I know this might be a bit of a infantile, low-level thing to go into, but because it's not our bread and butter, could you just drag me down into some of the what's some of the things? So you're turning out to an instance such as this, or the Hermit's Peak, sort of Calf Canyon fire in 2022, probably more recent example. What's going through your head when you're turning out to some of these? Talk to people about some of the operational considerations, some of the hazard identification and environmental considerations. What things are we thinking when you're going to a wildfire? And I know this is not necessarily one of the core parts of our conversation today, but I'd love to go here for a minute just because I have the privilege of speaking with you about it. What's going through the minds of commanders and team leaders and task force leaders when they're deployed on these types of incidents? What are the general tactics and tools that are available to people, where you're from? Because they're probably very different to the equipment that we use over here.
I think they probably are. And, we used Calf Canyon Hermit's Peak. So that was an early season fire. And one of the first things that I had as we're en route there, because it's about a 5-hour drive from my house, was that I had to get out of my own way about thinking that this was an early season fire. Why the heck are they calling us? This can't be that complex. I had all these things that had nothing to do with the reality of the ground. And I realized I was already setting myself up for bias, because there are certain assumptions I had made because of the time of the year. And honestly, because it was inconvenient to me, because I had some vacation plans that now were put. And as I was driving over there, I started to reflect on that. And then you look at the background conditions, drought, forest conditions, all that in the specific area, which is, it's landscape level. It's across the broad area. That's as a guy that does a strategy, that's one of the things I look at. And then I look at where are the values, where are the things that we need to protect, and then how much time do we have? So based on how they're anticipating the fire is going to move, what's the amount of time that we have? And this is in days, not in hours or minutes, between where the fire is and where the
That's
things
a
are.
whole different mindset to get yourself into. That's what I'm talking about. Just for insight, I mean, the fire you're talking about, there was 300,000 acres. Just to give people an understanding of the size of these things. And you have to automatically accept some, I want to say, losses, because we're not going to stop this today. So let's start there. We're not going to stop this today. And that's fine. We're going to put that within the bucket of success, ironically, that we are going to accept we're going to lose this much before we can make an effective stop. As a micro example for the UK audience,
No, you're right.
thatch fires. So we have thatched roofs. Are you familiar with thatched roofs?
Yes.
Yeah. So we have I was at an incident a number of years ago where started off in one small residence thatch fire, and it ended up, we thought we were going to make a hard stop on it, but we didn't go in at the right point, and we spent so much time trying to cut through the roof and put lances into this thing that ended up spreading through 5 properties. And these thatched buildings are listed heritage buildings, so they're extraordinarily expensive. And I remember getting there like 5 hours earlier and saying to the guy 5 houses down, like, oh, no worries, brother, you haven't got to take all your stuff out. It's not going to get anywhere near you. And ended up losing all 5 of them. And you just go, you have to accept that you're going to have to write certain things off, don't you? I know, sorry to drag you into that segue for a second, but your time horizon is days, not hours.
It is. And let me ask you about your thatch roof. So one of the traps that we can fall into is because you that value, that next house, that community, whatever you're trying to protect, you want to protect that, and you'll look, and there'll be a place that you would like to stop the fire, whether it's at the edge of that house to not go on the next thatch roof, or on a ridge or a road, and you go next ridge and then you fail, and then you go next ridge or next house and you fail, and then you go next house. Instead of taking that moment to go, hey, you know what? The best place to do this is at the end of the second house. So we're going to give up that. And that's hard, right? That is super hard.
People's homes, people's communities, thousands of acres of people's land.
But that's decision quality, right? If your information says, based on the time it takes to muster all your resources, what you need to get a line prepped to get it cut and then burned out, so you burn out the fuel between the main fire and the line wide enough so the fire doesn't cross it, and the time it takes to do that, if you haven't allowed enough time and you just hope you'll get it done, and then you fail, and then you go to the next ridge and then you fail.
Hope isn't a strategy.
Hope is not a strategy. Now you've squandered all your decision space, and the fire's in the community. And
it's that best worst decision analogy that you spoke about before.
Yep, the least worst decision is like, there's going to be a bad outcome. How can we minimize the consequence? What's the best decision to minimize that consequence?
Drag me back down, sorry, because I pulled you out again, into the tactical. So we're talking about, because again, a lot of these, from smoke jumpers to cutting fire lines to, I don't want to say flamethrowers, but to torches and controlled burns, and just take me right down into what the first responder on the ground is doing, because a lot of what we use in the UK, because we have an abundance of accessible water and things like that, we have different strategies.
Yep, and that is in the Southwest, not a lot of that. So in the Southwest United States, not a lot of water. So the basic premise is that you whether you use something that's existing like a road, or whether you create it like a hotshot crew digs a line, is you remove the fuel next to the ground, and then 8 or 10 feet wider around there, you remove the fuel to prevent it from going up into the trees. And then you
how are they removing that fuel?
With chainsaws. Yeah, chainsaws and use it.
I just want to explain to people the sheer grunt work that gets done here, because it's not. We have a big agricultural community in the UK, and we can quickly, if I've got a field fire, I can quickly mobilise 5 farmers to start digging out a line, and they'll dig it, and it'll be 3 or 4 foot wide quite quickly. All of this is being done, chainsaws dragging out, literally hand digging. I mean, these lines are sometimes only a few feet wide or a few inches wide. It hasn't got to be. I'm astonished when I've seen some of the training and operational, instruction of how they cut the lines. They're not very wide.
No, it's not very wide, and it's it is, sometimes it's lots of times you're cutting through rocks and everything, and you got and And it's just a lot of
breaking
it's
work.
rough work. I'm thankful for
And
the
also, you've got to think about the crew resource management, the rotation of crews, and the welfare of these individuals, because your assumption of how quickly this is going to happen. I mean, this stuff must take, like, I mean, we've already said, it takes days to implement some of these tactics. But when you're making those decisions, they're quick decisions, or not even quick decisions, but like, you can say something very quickly. To
oh yeah,
enact
yeah,
it can take
yeah.
days.
Mine is the joke they make, like hotshot superintendents, people in charge of those crews about like operations. I'm flying around on a helicopter and every ridge looks good and the line's not that steep, and you're right. You don't appreciate it like the way they do. And so you better listen
Yeah.
to them, right? Because that's the people at the coalface that are doing the hard work that have done a lot of it and have the expertise, and you better listen to them. So you get that line put in, and then you got to burn it out. Usually we use drip torches, which is a basic the size of a small fire extinguisher with diesel and gas mixed together with a little wick on the end, and you walk around and you light the fire on the side that the main fire is, and then you make sure it doesn't spot, make sure embers don't go over onto the other side, which sounds kind of simple, but how you do that to be
So
effective.
they go around with beaters as well to knock down those embers that drop over,
We
or
do it different with tools. They'll dig them up or with some water. But in
Jesus.
the southeast, they do it like that with beaters. And it's one of the things you tell when you have an experienced crew is they'll be looking towards the green side, towards the sides you don't want to burn. If you have a less experienced crew, they'll be watching the fire burning towards the inside. The competent crew
Yeah.
about that. They know that that's going to happen. That's just
Too busy staring at the hot thing,
yeah,
petrified that you need to keep control of that and everything's happening behind you.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then you get enough depth, and then if once that fire's off that line, they feel you get adequate depth. Now we use we use UASs a lot, use small drones, or helicopters, and then we drop these things called dragon eggs is the little ones that the UASs drop, but are they are full of potassium permanganate, and then you inject a little ethylene glycol into it, and then it drops, and then those will start a fire. So you've created this line, and now you're using that to create more of a line. And ideally, you will remove all that ground fuel, anything that's flammable, in a wide enough area that when the main fire hits it, it doesn't go across. That's the basic premise behind it. And yeah,
Taking this up to some of the largest, because you spoke before about having scalable models for decision making. Because I mean, even for that, 300,000 acres is quite inconceivable for someone with my cognitive ability. But when we take that up to 2020, the largest wildfires in California's history, there was over 1 million acres. But you were involved in that as well. Am I right in saying?
we're on some of them on the very back end of them. And so, yeah,
How does decision making change when we scale it up to those levels? And how do we keep those decision making principles aligned no matter what the scale of an incident?
yeah, that's a great question. So I think the main reason is how it changes is, and something we need to be conscious of is that everybody in the system is fatigued at a certain point that fire's been going on for that long. The people that are eating smoke every day in their homes, and they are going to behave differently. And we talk about complex adaptive system, right? Politicians are going to behave differently. Local leadership is going to behave differently. They just want it to go out. And so they are going to be less patient, and, and that's understandable. And then for us, it's, if you've been trying that long, and we're not good at this at all, but if you've been trying that long to put out that large fire and you've been ineffective, then one more hotshot crew, 10 more engines, all that's not going to tip the scales. But there may be all these other incidents that could benefit from the resources that you have sucked into your giant thing that could make a big difference. And on a national level, we don't do that well. And we should, because there's sometimes when you're like, hey, based on these conditions, we just need to back up a long, long ways, take more time to get something done, and then allow a lot of those resources we have committed here to go other places where they can be effective. That that's super hard to do, especially at the local level where it impacts you and you're not dealing with the other stuff in another state.
How do you maintain morale in a situation like that, and still building that trust that ultimately is required to capitalize on those windows in an effective tactical pivot when, like you say, and I find this, we have something in the UK called ISAR, which is International Search and Rescue, and I know you guys and girls have a lot of incredible international teams. We've worked with one or two of them before. When we do our selection courses for them, they're three days long, because everybody can be professional and effective and very, very useful on the incident ground when they're in the first 6-7 hours of a shift. How do you sort of build those leadership tokens with people so that when you are 3 or 4 days deep, you've missed a few deadlines, you've lost a few battles, but the opportunity for that tactical pivot to win the proverbial war and capitalize? How do you do that? Because I always think of it like as sporting analogies. When how do we get people together and start getting them all turning in the right direction at the right time to capitalize on that?
Yeah. I'll tell you about one of the ways I think is most effective. I'll give you an example of when I didn't do it and the impact. And that
Love it.
is
Honest.
You need to be clear with everybody about what it is you're going to be able to do to support them. Because sometimes, so they'll say, your type 1 team, which now we don't say that we're typed, but that you're supposed to be able to handle the most complex incidents. And if for whatever reason, there's things within your system, within your team that where you're short staffed in certain areas, whether it's logistics or planning capabilities or operational leadership, whatever, and that you're not going to give someone what you would normally be able to give them, you need to start with that right off the bat. And that's not the logistics fault. We make a joke. We all have black shirts that we wear with our team logo on them, and it's the team. It doesn't matter what part of the team it is. The team is only going to be able to provide you this much. And then you make sure you ask them what it is that you need to do, and you make sure that you get an honest assessment of whether they can do it. And then you let them know when you think you'll be able to provide them more support. That's one thing. Managing people's fatigue, and so their decision quality, especially in those high risk places, that means making sure that they have a good place to sleep. And those little things are like, it's so easy to blow off that the day sleeping people, the people that are sleeping the day because they're working nights, that, hey, you set them up with something, but it's those things drilling into them and find out, like, are you really getting adequate rest? Because we're asking you to put in 16 hours again tomorrow, and we're having you sleep in a gym with 100 other people, and it's only air conditioning is only getting it down to 85 degrees in the daytime, and you can't make it dark. That's miserable. And you got to remember that that's miserable, and do what you can to help them. And then, that we were on a fire on Lake Chelan, and it had been in that situation in Washington, Big Lake in Washington, that we had been on our heels and hadn't been providing adequate support. And we asked these crews to do a lot, where they would work until they stopped. They would sleep where they were. They would eat MREs, military rations. They'd pick up and do it again. Did it 3 or 4 days in a row. And then we finally got up the capacity to support them, and we totally dropped the ball. And I remember the hotshot superintendent came back into camp, and he goes, "Hey, when you said you couldn't support us and you used to do the work, we did. And when you said you could support us, you failed." And man, I wanted to make excuses and I wanted to blame different parts of the team on what happened. But I still remember, I'm like, you're absolutely right. We did. That's not acceptable. And it's that part, right? Because he was still pissed when he left. Don't get me wrong, but you know, yeah, right. And so you just gotta take those lumps and make sure that people understand that you really you care that you dropped the ball. Because when you have 3 different groups of crews on ridges and they're getting delivered meals by helicopter, and you screw up, and one crew gets all the steak, the other people get all the mashed potatoes, the other people get the broccoli. The steak and mashed potato people are probably fine. They'll probably be all right. But the broccoli people are going to hate you. And you better just own that all you gave them was, the broccoli part of the rations.
Did you read Simon Sinek's Leaders Eat Last, I think it is?
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of analogy is a really tough one for people to get their head around, because seniority, they say, you should take all the responsibility and give away all the credit. it's about realizing that, yes, you need to be well fed, well rested, because you're going to be making decisions that are going to ripple out and have a great deal of effect on other people. But the boots on the ground are the ones that are going to enact those decisions. And they really need to be treated like, I think in his Leaders Eat Last thing, he mentioned a few professional sports team coaches and managers who would always fly coach or something like that, and the athletes fly first class, because the athletes are they're the ones that are going to do it. You know, they're the ones that their bodies are the key part of this operation.
Yep, right.
Difficult, all these things, easily said, very, very hard to enact, especially that welfare element of it, because you can't pour from an empty cup at the end of the day. And I can't really even start to put my mind into some of the challenges of these, you know, multiple days of 16-hour shifts. You know what? This is a good, maybe little segue I would love to ask you about. Do you think firefighting's a job for life?
Wow, that's a great question. It is a 20-year job, and I worry when it becomes like a 25-year job or a 30-year job, because especially those, you know, you can say that they get the winters off. The fire season's getting longer. That those hotshot crews get less of a winter off. That their pay isn't adequate for them to make a living wage unless they get a bunch of overtime. And then you get a bunch of overtime means that you're beating yourself up. The new stuff they're finding out about how even, you know, wood fire smoke, the increase in the incidence of different types of cancer, stuff that in the structural fire world we've been tracking for a long time. They're starting to acknowledge that, but we don't take good enough care of them for them to do this for a whole career.
Why do you think that is? Like, you know, it's great. You know, you see 9/11, you see, you know, Grenfell here in the UK, big incidents, and during COVID, people clapped for first responders, police, paramedics, firefighters, all that sort of stuff. But it's the expressed values versus enacted values.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? Like,
right? Yep. Yeah.
I worry that some of the highest performing members of our community actually wouldn't have any aspiration to join the fire and rescue service or join the military or join the police service, because they're not really rewarded for it. They're not loved. And also I think, I'm getting right down into a weird rabbit hole here, sorry, but like, I think there's lots of ways you could reward people, because I know people say, oh, pay is everything. You could pay people more. But for me, like in the UK, and I know it's a big governmental thing, I don't know how I'd ever achieve this, but like in the States, do they do anything like this where you could back engineer it, whereby you could say, if you're a first responder, you don't pay any housing tax. If you're a first responder, you get free I mean, I know a lot of us get free medical anyway, but like you can take things off other ends of the spectrum, because romantically, I think a lot of first responders, we act out of enthusiasm and we just love the job. We're so goddamn romantic. For God's sake, you and I are sat here talking about the sector because we're that goddamn passionate about it in our private time. I don't think accountants are doing this shit. You know what I mean? They're not spending time on a podcast. I'm sure there's lots of great accountancy podcasts out there, but like, they're not spending time in their private time. We seem to love the job, but I think that makes us vulnerable to abuse. We're a bit like a beaten partner, whereby we're not looked after very much, you know, and I'm like, well, Jayson, why do you keep doing it? Well, she loves me. She loves me, that, you know, and we say that about the job, but it loves me. You know, it won't fucking look after you. When you've got cancer or when you get a bad back and you're out the job, that's fucking game over, brother. Like, no one is going to come and pay your mortgage for you and your partner. They're not going to do that. There is a question in there somewhere about, like, how do we make this a job that people can go, enjoy, do for 20 years, 25 years, and it not have a tremendously detrimental effect on the rest of their life? How old are you, out of curiosity?
How old am I? I'm 55.
When did you start doing this? And just give people, I know we'll have read some of it in the intro anyway, but give us a background on yourself.
Full-time job. So I've been 27 years in the fire service, 3 years in the military before that, and then going to schools. Yep. Yeah. So
27 years.
Yep.
How long are you going to keep doing it for? Because you've not broken your own rule there, but you've outlived the 20, 25 year element.
Yeah. Probably 4 more years, something like that. And I'll tell you that my job, as far as the physical impacts on my body, is easy right now. It is, you know, but I worry about, because on these large fires.
You've chosen to step into leadership roles though, which is great. But if you were still, digging out, fire lines, this is not sustainable.
I don't think it is. And when you sit there and you're exposing yourself to that many carcinogens and the smoke and everything, you're on the front line and you're doing that all the time. I'm sure somebody smarter than me could figure out what a life expectancy reduction that is. And so thing one is that we need to acknowledge that. Thing two, especially when it comes to wildland firefighters, is they have domain specific expertise that the system is designed for them to build through experience and through specialized training, not through college stuff, not through something else. It is a blue collar apprenticeship kind of setup. And so they become experts in that. And then we marginalize that expertise because they don't have degrees or and we don't help them transition to something later on. We are doing them a disservice because we need them to be experts in that at that time. And we need that to be their focus, is developing that expertise, especially because like you said, same thing here, the org chart should look like a triangle, right? With the more people at the bottom. But the joke is now, especially in the federal service with everything going on, is it's more like the dad bod. It's a little thick in the middle because people can promote up because there's vacancies there, but we're not getting the people in the bottom. And I think the other question is the ones that rode for the brand and that said they're going to stick it out through thick and thin because they believed in the system. Everything that's been happening in the federal with Doge and all that is show them that was a bad bet. Which is terrible, right? Because these people, we need them.
Mm-hmm.
We need more of them than we have, and we're going to have less at the end of the day. Because, I know talking to friends, they were holding on because of their retirement and because it's hard to change systems from a federal to a state to a local. And some are making different decisions right now because the environment isn't tenable for them. And that's terrible.
You have that investment bias, don't we? Where, but Jayson, I've done it for 20 years. I can't fucking stop now. I've got the golden handcuffs. I need to eke this out. And almost in making those terrible acknowledgements later on in your career, you're like kind of making that acceptance to yourself that you're like, shit, I've got this wrong. I thought someone was going to look after me. I thought I was going to be valued. I thought people appreciate. People did. They said they appreciated what I do. I remember getting into it, and everyone spoke so highly of first responders. Yeah. Now I feel like I'm a bit of a mug. I feel like I've been taken for a ride a little bit.
Yeah, because you need people that want to provide service to others, and I think that with that, whether it's because of the bad calls that may keep you awake at night and that impacts or what it's done to your to your health, the fact that you always have a chronic cough right now because of the conditions that you endured, is we need to accept that these people, and the argument is, well, they do this willingly. Yeah, and thank God they do. But they have chosen a life of service. We need to be clear about what the consequences of that are. We need to pay them an appropriate wage. You're right, it is not everything, but you should.
They say money's not the most important thing, but it's right up there with oxygen.
Yeah,
you'd struggle to live without it.
Right. And especially, like we need them to live in these mountain towns where the incidents are. And in the US, that's getting harder and harder with the Flagstaff where I live. The cost is much more expensive than some of the other towns, but we want crews that are there all the time that staff these different things in the summertime. We need to pay them so they can be here all the time.
We have that literal. I could spin that into an example for the UK. We have what's called on-call. We don't have any volunteer firefighters anymore, but we have on-call and retained is what we refer to them as. And a lot of these areas are more rural areas, beautiful scenery, very expensive homes. And then you're asking somebody to do an on-call role, so they carry a pager and alerter. And we want them to respond 48, 60, 84 hours a week, get paid £500, which is fuck all. You know what I mean? When your rent or your mortgage is £1,000 and you've got a full-time job, the people that live in those areas are usually commuting to a main city for their main employment. And we live in like a global village now where on your weekends, you want to go with your partner abroad. You want to take a 2-day trip to Paris. You want to go and visit your friend in the States. You want to travel up north. You don't want to be locked and stuck in that community because you're carrying a pager for £2 an hour. You're trapped by that analogy that it's the right thing to do. I like the idea of service. I worry that well, I know that's not sustainable. Recruitment and retention is just so goddamn hard, and we get to the point now in the UK where it costs so much to train a firefighter, and it might take a year or a year and a half before they're useful, and then they only stay in for 3 years.
Yeah.
So you get it's a net negative. You get in a deficit from the investment that you put into that person, and I think we first responders and many other civil servants. It's the bedrock of society, and the irony is, we all speak about that the bedrock of society is crumbling beneath our very feet, and I have grave concerns for my daughter and my children. What's it going to be like for them in 20 years? And I'm sure people were saying this 20 years ago, and I'm sure they were saying it 40 years before that. But I am very unsure about how we're going to will our way out of this one. I'm not. And I'm very hopeful. I'm an optimist, but I don't see how it's going to work.
Right, you could rub dirt on it and say it's going to be fine for a certain amount of time, and pretty soon it's not. I think with these incident management teams, all of these teams, it's a militia. It's a second job for us, and the numbers have been slowly declining for several years. And I think after what's been going on this year, they're going to take a steep drop off, but it's been absorbed in a lot of ways on that level with the teams that are available just going out more, but at the expense of their day jobs, at the expense of the relationships at home, expense of all other kind of stuff. And you don't know when that critical mass is reached until you look back retrospectively at it and say, "Oh yeah, that was that was the fall of 25 when the whole system broke."
Mm-hmm.
Then people go elsewhere and they do other things, and then you can't get them back. And then you've lost all that experience, and and I think to your point about what you do with those about those 3 years in and quitting is there was a great the labor union, firefighters union in Arizona did a study where they had 0 to 5 year students or firefighters, and they asked them a bunch of questions about ones that thought about leaving, why they think about leaving, what was the big shocker about the job. And I'll send it to you once we get it,
Please,
it's available. But the one thing they in the brief they gave us is that they quit their leaders a lot of times. So bad captains and people that are negative and poison the well and do that as their first line leaders, they're more prone to quit them than they are to quit an agency. And the other thing is that there's a mismatch between what we sell as the job and what the job is, and they become disenfranchised with that. And that, or at least here,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%.
We're a medical
100%.
department that does fires occasionally. That's the truth about what we are.
You are most definitely now. And we have a weird one in the UK where we're trying desperately to avoid elements of that, but equally, because of our successes in the way we build our homes and environments and business safety and all this sort of stuff, there's a massive reduction in fires. So, the government's looking at you like, well, you're only going to do fires, and yes, we do rescue and animal rescue and all that sort of shit, hazmats and everything. We do all that other stuff, but we don't do co-responding. We don't turn out to medical calls. And as our core business continues to shrink, you have to put yourself in the government's position and say, well, what else are you willing to do? We have a community that's really struggling and has a lot of needs to be filled. What do you want to do? Because if you don't want to do any of the other stuff, we're just going to keep reducing your funding. And then you're kind of cutting your nose off to spite your face. I personally feel like I would like to see us do more corresponding in the UK, but I do acknowledge that when I see what's happened in the US and speak to a lot of your colleagues, once you've opened those floodgates, you ain't never closing them. You ain't never closing them. So there is an element of careful what you wish for. I want to be respectful of your time. I wanted to talk to you about your operational mind map. But that is going to need, I'd love to have a follow-up conversation about that, because that is a beautiful piece of work. I sent it to a couple of colleagues this morning, and they were like, fuck me, can I speak to the guy that wrote it? And they're like, did you come up with that yourself?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I just, it was.
That's the thing of beauty. I love that.
An iPad app that was on how to make mind maps. So I just started tracking all the different interactions I had. Cause
That
you know,
is such a beautiful brain dump.
yeah, it was cathartic actually to be able to just push everything off and then
Because that helps, like, that's how I think. I think this, without getting into a neurodiversity conversation, that, when I saw that, I spent an hour looking at it this morning, and there was some terminology elements in there that obviously I wasn't familiar with. But I want to, if after today's conversation, I'd love to have you back on to talk about this. I want to be respectful of our time, but I want to circle back, just back to original conversation of leadership, and also reflect a little bit on your years in the military, because something. We've had a guy called Dan Stevens on in the UK, really, really consummate professional, paratrooper, military background himself. And we talk about the Fire and Rescue Service being like a paramilitary organisation. And some people hear that and they wrongly, I think, associate, like they bring in other words with it around misogyny and too much command and control and bullying and a little bit too much authoritarian leadership. And I'm like, whoa, steady. Like, our military is something we should be incredibly proud of. It's one of our greatest exports in the UK. But I've never been in the military, but I've got many colleagues that are, and I think they do an incredible job. We should be proud of that, and I think there's a lot of lessons. We don't want to adopt the whole thing, whole shot, because we don't carry a weapon. It's not the same. But the question that's hidden all amongst that is, from your time within the military, like, what things do you think you've brought over with you? What things would you like to see more of in our fire departments? What things do you think we can learn about what I see, and sure you'll have your own opinion about it, what I see as a very high performing culture, but also there seems to be a lot less bullshit in it as well. And I think that, like, help me unpick that a little bit. If you have a few leadership lessons that you could pull across that you think are useful, that we should be thinking more about. I mean, the red teaming analogy is a perfect one.
Individual accountability is one of the biggest things I think that we should pull across more. And it is.
What does that look like to deploy? What's deployable about that? Talk to me more about what that means.
Sure. So every individual, a leader's responsibility is not to make sure that you keep your certs up, that you maintain things. They are to set the standard and set an expectation and ensure that you have all the tools you need to do that. And then they should be able to expect that you're going to do that, whether that's, show up on time or take care of that stuff. And I feel like we've set some preconditions, at least in the US, where we walk people through things and then we make sure they're done. And then that's time you're not spending doing something else. And then,
mate, we've done this, in the UK massively at the minute, because we used to go through a parenting analogy where we tell you, this is your reaccreditation for Insta Command, this is when your fitness test is, this is when your course revalidation is, and we'd be parenting people and then absorbing a lot of organisational time and cost when people don't show up for stuff. Whereas now it's more that you're a competent firefighter, so this is your role map, these are your skill sets you need to maintain, these are the dates and the courses. If you fail to show up, you'll be taken through performance and capability and disciplinary. Because that's a you thing. I've got enough shit on my bucket. That's not a me problem. That's a you problem. I can help. And this is I learned this good phrase recently, a couple of years ago, but it was like, as your line manager, as your leader, what can I do to help you? Because that's not like saying, if I just say, what can I do to help you, Jayson? You can say, well, Pete, I'm struggling with money a little bit at the minute. I've got some problems with my missus at home. And I mean, if you can I'll stop you there. I can care and empathize and sympathize with a lot of this. As your line manager, what can I do to help you in the confines of what my job actually is? Because some of those are a you problem that you need to own and sort out.
And if your job, you can either choose to make people excellent or comfortable as a leader. And I don't know that you can make people both. And so if your job as a line leader is to make people excellent, then
I love that.
There are some things that get pushed down on them, right? And that's certainly one thing that comes from.
And also, you're giving them an opportunity to fail safely,
yeah,
and absorb the responsibility.
Yep.
And you're like, here's a big cake of responsibility. Here's the slice that I'm going to take. The rest of that is yours.
Uh-huh.
And when you get that wrong, it's going to hurt. But you need to learn how it's going to hurt. I'm not going to sack you because it hurt first time, but you need to learn that it hurts. Because at the minute, I'm just taking a lot of the hurt. You know what I mean? And there's a parent-child analogy that we need to get away from a little bit, isn't there?
There is. And if you think about, with mission command, if you think about like leadership as language by the submariner captain,
Oh yeah, turn the ship around.
yeah, turn the ship around. Yep. Same person. Yep.
Oh God, I'm gonna
It's
get
an
it. Give
M,
us a
his last name
second.
begins with M, but anyhow, it'll come to us. Yep. It's on my shelf somewhere. I have too many books to find it, um, but when he's talking about that intent based, I mean, fundamentally it was intent based leadership, right? I intend to, and you would say what you're going to do. You weren't asking for permission, but you were telling them what you're going to do, and you're telling them everything you did that was necessary to ensure that the thing you were going to do was done safely. And then he would just say, very well then. And
David Marquette
David
was turn the
Marquette,
ship
thank you very
around.
much.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so if we want people to behave that way and be assimilated to a mission command kind of leadership philosophy, then they have to demonstrate disciplined initiative. And that initiative starts with taking care of all your own stuff. That, like you said, is you stuff and not me stuff. And we create a bigger gap to get people there if we pick up all, the parenting stuff and then they just go about their day. That's not helping people evolve into more effective first line leaders. I don't
Yeah,
think.
it's the big analogy from that is empowering individuals to with control and competence, and also like you spoke around clarity.
Yeah.
That leads to that more resilient and effective organization. The concepts of decentralized decision making, moving with authority towards the information that they're aware of, and their ability to have that autonomy to make a decision with a clear intent from you.
I
Yeah,
have one more
absolutely
good
love that.
and one thing to avoid. So the thing that I think we need to do more of is recognize that technical competence is the baseline. Is the non-technical skills, the how you manage crews, how you manage individuals, how you're effective as a leader. We don't, at least in the US, we don't spend a lot of time developing those skills, at least not at the same level as technical competencies. And that's where the problems are. In the military, there's much more recognition of the fact that that is critical, that being a
Mm.
leader means you have to give someone leadership skills and you have to help them develop those leadership skills.
We make a lot of assumptions with leadership skills, don't they? Because I think so much of that comes into the nature nurture conversation, like the nurture element of how you were brought up, what your values and your morals are. I mean, they should align to the organization anyway, but your interpersonal skills, a lot of that is assumed. And yes, there's an argument for having a flexible, adaptive leadership approach. And yes, you act differently with different people, but don't make those assumptions because tactical skills are easy because there's a process, there's a system, there's 7 steps about how to load the rifle, about how to set up on the fire ground, whatever it might be. We can easily break that down, talk about those complex versus complicated elements again. Whereas the interpersonal skills, and that's when people go through station manager, it be in the UK, your tools then, you're likely never going to pick up a hose again, unless you want to, because you want to be an authentic leader and you want to demonstrate to people. You're probably not going to be digging the fire line again. Your tools are your words, your ability to build rapport, your clarity of the way you relate your information, your tactical objectives, your ability to build relationships through different organizations with other priorities, especially when you're getting into these more complex, like a wildfire incident or a large major incident where it's multi-agency incident, and trying to understand and appreciate other people's objectives may differ from yours. And those soft skills, and this, you're right, because in the military, in Sandhurst and places in the UK, they spend years developing these leadership skills. Years. As soon as you go through a level 2, level 3 command course in the UK, it's like, make sure you've got your command competence, put you on a hazardous materials course, or put you on a fire investigation course, or make sure you've got this high level qualification, then off you go.
Yeah.
But really, the tools that are going to be at your disposal are the people that you're leading.
Yep. And you're like, think about the 4 levels of training and stuff to get to level 4 where you actually apply it on the job. We don't even hardly measure that in leadership stuff, except someone wants to promote or whatever. We kind of measure it. We try to, but we don't measure it in a way that allows people to learn from what they did wrong and highlights the stuff they did right that they need to amplify. And so with that, the one that we need to watch out for is that we measure the wrong things when it comes to leadership. And I think the U.S. military has been doing a lot of work to get away from that, but there's a way somebody sounds and looks and acts as a leader that we give more weight to that persona than we do their actual capabilities. And what that does is, so when I talk about diversity, I mean diversity of thought, is we want the most, we want people looking at problems from the most different perspective, like a 12 lead EKG of your heart versus a 3 lead. You get a better picture when you see things from different perspectives. If we use someone's, square jawed, 6'2", looks like a firefighter as a proxy for their leadership skills, then we miss opportunities to promote the excellent people that don't look like that.
Yeah. Because some people, like you say, they couldn't tell you what they're doing, but they just seem to get it. And then when you relate that to competence, the 4 stages that you were speaking to, just before that, is that, I'm trying to remember now, it's the conscious competence.
Kirkpatrick.
Yeah, so conscious incompetence, you're aware of the skill, but you're not yet proficient at it. The conscious competence, you're able to use the skill, but with little effort. And then that unconscious competence. I think some people accidentally land at unconscious competence, where they're performing the skills becomes automatic. And that's probably someone that's had kids or led a sports team or something like that in the past. And it just comes naturally to them.
Yeah.
And then they eventually move into that. They just do it. But most of us are either consciously incompetent.
Yeah.
And then it's moving people into that stage of conscious competence through giving them those learning cycles, the whole plan, do, check, act. But also, like, we use EDIP when we talk about tactical skills. So explain, demonstrate, imitate, practice.
There you go. Yep.
We do that with tactical skills, but I don't think we develop environments for our leaders to be able to practice, observe, get feedback. You've got some great stuff on your website around 360 feedback, and how to fold that into organizations. I don't think we're there yet, and I think the more we continue. And I've probably failed in it today when I get so deep into some of the tactical sides of the job, because that's the interesting bit for some people, right? Because it's fun and you can learn it, but we're pretty damn good. Not talking about me and you, but as a sector, we're pretty damn good at doing the thing. A lot of our challenges in our ability to squeeze all the juice out the tube in terms of the team's capability lies so much in the soft skills, in the leadership elements, in our ability to get that team vibrating at their optimum performance, in that whole like stimulation optimization curve, getting people in that sweet spot, getting in that flow state, as people would talk about. But no, mate, I absolutely love that. I'm so glad we got this conversation, because I know people won't know we've been trying. When I talk about the cycle of guests, it can take months and years sometimes. And, let's start as we mean to go on and demonstrate a bit of authenticity here. I've failed twice, I think, in organising our conversation together, but you've demonstrated great leadership and understanding and patience. You presented me with all the information. You gave me a most comprehensive brief probably received ever from a guest. But beyond that, that's your sphere of control and sphere of influence. It's down to me to show up as a professional and do the thing I said I was going to do. So I appreciate you giving me lots of space and forgiveness in my inability to show up as the best version of myself the first 2 occasions. But I really appreciate your time today, brother.
And I accept that, and I appreciate the compliment. I will add that if I was to create my own narrative about why that happened and then expect that you were perfect every time, I would need to hold myself to that same standard, and I would fail miserably. Yeah.
Mate, I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for your time today. I'd love to have you back on in 4 or 6 months' time, because I know, certainly for me, but perhaps for both of us, when I listen back to stuff, I'm like, oh, God, I can't believe I didn't go there. I didn't ask Jayson about this, didn't ask Jayson about that. And also, talking about that 360 feedback, I still interrupt way too much. I'm such a bugger that I get that excited energy when I have the privilege of speaking to somebody such as yourself. And I know I get too excited. But again, that's that thing. You're trying to get better as a conversational partner, as a communicator. And they're the things, that's why I love the podcast so much, is I try to develop myself as an active listener, as a communicator. And I know I will show up and fail every time. And that's okay. But don't make progress the enemy of perfect. Do you know what I mean? That's what I try to tell myself. 100%. Right, some love to the family, brother. I'll speak to you soon.
All right, you take care.